The man who survived 2 atomic bombs on the morning of August 6, 1945, a Japanese engineer stepped off a streetcar in Hiroshima. He was tired. He was thinking about work. And he was about to witness something no human being had ever seen before. A flash brighter than the sun exploded across the sky. The air itself seemed to ignite. Buildings vanished. People disappeared. An entire city was swallowed by a force beyond imagination. Millions would later learn about Hiroshima from history books. But one man saw it happen with his own eyes. And somehow, he survived. Most people would call that a miracle. But the truly unbelievable part of this story hadn't happened yet. Because just 3 days later, he would find himself standing beneath another atomic bomb. His name was Tsutomu Yamaguchi. And this is the story of the only man officially recognized as surviving both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. To understand how impossible this story really is, we need to go back to the summer of 1945. Japan was losing the war. For years, the country had fought across Asia and the Pacific. Cities were burning. Resources were running out. American bombers crossed Japanese skies almost daily. Yet few people could imagine what was coming next. At 30 years old, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was not a soldier. He worked as a marine engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Like millions of ordinary civilians, he was trying to continue life while the world around him collapsed. In early August, he was sent on a business trip to Hiroshima. The assignment was nearly finished. His bags were packed. The next morning he planned to return home to Nagasaki. It should have been an ordinary day. Instead, it became one of the most infamous mornings in human history. At approximately 8:15 a.m., Yamaguchi was walking toward a shipyard. Suddenly he heard the distant sound of an aircraft overhead. He looked up. Most people in Hiroshima barely reacted anymore. American planes frequently passed overhead. But something felt different. A single bomber crossed the sky. Moments later, a small object fell from the aircraft. Yamaguchi stared at it. Then the world exploded. A blinding white flash filled the horizon. 4. A fraction of a second, everything became pure light. The heat was so intense that it felt as though the sun had descended directly onto the city. Then came the shockwave. It hit with unimaginable force. Yamaguchi was thrown through the air. His body slammed into the ground. His eardrums ruptured. Parts of his face and upper body were severely burned. For several moments, he couldn't understand what had happened. Nothing made sense. The city around him was gone. Buildings that had stood moments earlier had collapsed. Glass, steel, wood, and human bodies covered the streets. Fires erupted in every direction. Thousands of people stumbled through the ruins. Many were burned beyond recognition. Others wandered silently, unable to comprehend the destruction surrounding them. Some historians describe Hiroshima as a city transformed into hell within seconds. For survivors, that description was not an exaggeration. Yamaguchi later recalled seeing people with skin hanging from their bodies. Others begged for water. Many simply collapsed where they stood. No one knew they were witnessing the first atomic attack in human history. They only knew that something impossible had happened. The bomb dropped over Hiroshima carried a simple nickname. Little Boy. The name sounded harmless. The reality was not. Within moments, tens of thousands of people were dead. By the end of the year, the death toll would rise dramatically from injuries, burns, and radiation sickness. Yet somehow, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was still alive. Injured. Burned. Barely able to hear. But alive. And that created a new problem. How could he get home? The city was in ruins. Transportation barely existed. Communication systems had collapsed. Many survivors simply stayed where they were. But Yamaguchi was determined to return to his wife and infant son in Nagasaki. For 2 days, he struggled through the aftermath. Every step was painful. His burns were severe. His hearing was damaged. The roads were crowded with survivors and rescue workers trying desperately to understand what had happened. Eventually, against all odds, he boarded a train. The journey itself felt like another miracle. The railway system had been devastated across many regions. Yet somehow, enough infrastructure remained for him to travel. As the train moved away from Hiroshima, Yamaguchi carried with him something nobody else in Nagasaki had. A first-hand account of the atomic bomb. The problem was that nobody could truly understand what he was trying to describe. How could they? No weapon like this had ever existed. No city had ever been destroyed in such a way. When Yamaguchi arrived home, his family was shocked by his appearance. His body was covered in bandages. His injuries were obvious. But despite everything he had endured, he was grateful. He had survived. The nightmare was over. Or so he thought. On the morning of August 9, only 3 days after Hiroshima, Yamaguchi reported to work. Even injured, he felt obligated to explain what he had witnessed. He met with colleagues at Mitsubishi's Nagasaki office. As the discussion began, he tried to describe the destruction. A single bomb. One aircraft. An entire city destroyed. Some co-workers were skeptical. The claims sounded impossible. How could one bomb destroy an entire city? Yamaguchi insisted it was true. He had seen it himself. Then history repeated itself. At approximately 11:02 a.m., another American bomber appeared over Nagasaki. The aircraft carried a different bomb. Its nickname was Fat Man. Its destructive power would become legendary. As Yamaguchi spoke with his colleagues, a brilliant flash suddenly illuminated the room. The exact same flash. The exact same impossible light. The exact same terrifying silence before destruction. For an instant, he knew. It was happening again. A second atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki. Another shockwave raced across the city. Windows shattered. Buildings collapsed. People were thrown to the ground. 3 days after surviving Hiroshima, Tsutomu Yamaguchi had survived another atomic blast. The odds are almost impossible to comprehend. One atomic bomb changed history. He experienced two. Most people spend their lives avoiding lightning. Yamaguchi stood beneath two of the most destructive explosions ever created by mankind. But surviving the blasts was only part of the story. The war itself was ending. Japan surrendered less than a week later. Across the country, millions celebrated the end of the conflict. For survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, however, a different struggle was beginning. Radiation. At the time, few people fully understood its effects. Many survivors developed serious illnesses. Others suffered chronic health problems for decades. Families lived with uncertainty. Doctors searched for answers. Yamaguchi faced those challenges as well. For years, he dealt with the physical and emotional consequences of what he had witnessed. The burns healed slowly. The memories never did. Imagine carrying those images for the rest of your life. The screams. The fires. The bodies. The knowledge that entire cities disappeared within seconds. Most survivors rarely spoke about their experiences. The trauma was simply too great. But as the decades passed, Yamaguchi chose a different path. Instead of remaining silent, he began telling his story. Again and again. Not because he wanted attention. Not because he wanted fame. Because he wanted people to understand what nuclear weapons actually do. Not in theory. Not on paper. In reality. He had seen the consequences firsthand. Twice. As years turned into decades, his story gradually became known around the world. Many people initially questioned whether someone could truly survive both bombings. The facts were carefully examined. Records were reviewed. Witnesses were interviewed. Eventually, the evidence confirmed what seemed impossible. It was true. In 2009, the Japanese government officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as a survivor of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. More than 60 years after the war, his extraordinary story received formal acknowledgement. By then, he was an elderly man. The world around him had changed dramatically. The Cold War had come and gone. Nuclear weapons had spread across the globe. Generations had grown up learning about Hiroshima and Nagasaki in classrooms. Yet few stories captured the human reality of those events more powerfully than his. Because statistics can feel distant. Numbers can feel abstract. 100,000 deaths. 200,000 deaths. They are almost too large to comprehend. But one man. One survivor. One human being standing beneath 2 atomic bombs. That is a story people remember. Tsutomu Yamaguchi passed away in 2010 at the age of 93. He lived long enough to watch the world enter a new century. Long enough to see grandchildren grow up. Long enough to tell his story. And perhaps that is the most remarkable part of all. Not that he survived Hiroshima. Not that he survived Nagasaki. But that after witnessing humanity at its worst, he spent the rest of his life trying to prevent it from happening again. History remembers Hiroshima. History remembers Nagasaki. But hidden between those 2 tragedies is the story of a single man who walked through both. A man who witnessed 2 suns rise over Japan. A man who survived the impossible. Twice.